Before we get started, I wanted to take a few seconds and mention that if you want to learn Unreal Engine 4 from the very beginning without any previous knowledge or experience, then take a look at Unreal Engine 4 Fundamentals. It includes 7 hours worth of video tutorials, and you can find out more at worldofleveldesign.com/store/UE4-fundamentals.php. Now let's get back to the tutorial. In this video, we're going to cover 27-step crash course to getting started with Unreal Engine 4. This is going to be an overview of what you need to know right now to get started. So I'll go through this very quickly and I'll show you the essential steps as you begin to learn Unreal Engine. So this video is perfect if you've never used Unreal Engine but need a quick, to-the-point tutorial that covers some of the most essential steps to get started. So please note that this is a broad overview of where and how to begin. If you want a more methodical step-by-step approach, then take a look at Fundamentals guide that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. So let's begin. First, you need to download and install Unreal Engine. So go to unrealengine.com, click on Get Unreal. This will take you to a sign up page. Register, sign up. This is completely free. Once you sign in, you'll be taken to your account, and here you can download Unreal Engine, right here. So go ahead, left click to download, and this will download a small installation file for Epic Games Launcher. This is a portal through which you can download any Unreal Engine version. You'll manage your projects, you can download content. So this file is not the actual game engine, but a portal through which you'll be able to download any version of Unreal Engine. So go ahead, double click, run it, and install Epic Games Launcher. Once you've installed the launcher, you'll have one of these shortcuts, either Unreal Engine 4 shortcut or Epic Games Launcher. So go ahead, double click and launch Epic Games Launcher. This will open up the launcher, and through here, now you can download Unreal Engine version by going to the Library tab, and under Engine Version, you click on Add Version, use the drop-down menu and choose which version you want to download and install. Now I have 3 versions right here, but in your case you won't see anything here, and under My Projects this will be completely empty. So you would just simply add a version and install probably the latest version of Unreal Engine 4, and then click Install. This will take some time, but after this, Unreal Engine 4 game engine will be on your computer. Now to open Unreal Engine Editor, you either have to have an existing project to open or create a new project. So if you first starting out, you won't have any projects to open. You'll have to create a new project. To do this, use the drop-down menu, select the engine version that you downloaded. If you have more, you can select them in the drop-down menu and click on the launch icon. This will open Unreal Project Browser. Switch over to New Projects, select Blueprint, select a game template that you want to have within your project. These are gameplay mechanics that are part of the project that you can start with. So here you can choose first-person shooter, puzzle, side-scroller, third-person. Then you would choose desktop and console. I usually keep these to desktop and console, maximum quality, and I enable starter content. This will give you a basic set of assets, such as materials, static meshes, textures, particle effects, audio, that you can use to create and construct your first environment. So it helps to have something that you can use right away. And then you would just set a location for your project to be stored. Default will be on your C drive. I save all of the projects to a different drive other than a C drive. And then you would just name your project. And finally, you would click on Create Project, and that would launch Unreal Editor and that project. And once you've created your project, you will see that project appear on the library and inside My Projects section. You will have a thumbnail and the name of the project. And from here, you'd be able to open that project at any time that you want to continue working on it. The starter content that you included with your project can be found inside the content browser. And this is what I mentioned before. You have a set of architecture static meshes, some audio files, blueprint, some textures, materials, and so on. So these will help you out to get something going right away, so you don't have to create your own custom static meshes to begin with. This is especially helpful when you are just starting out. When I open a project, the first thing I like to do is to disable autosave. Unreal Engine will automatically save your content. I like to disable this feature. So let's go to Edit, Edit to Preferences, and go to Loading and Saving. And under Autosave, I disable by checking off this box. You can keep this on, and if you do, you can define if you want to save maps, content, frequency in minutes, and warning in seconds. But I prefer to turn this off and manually save my content and my maps. Depending on the game template you chose, and in our case this was first-person shooter template, by default you will have a map open. To start a blank new map or a default map, go to File, New Level, and choose Default or Empty Level. Default will give you a few basic actors such as a player start, a ground plane, atmospheric fog, directional light, skybox, a map that you can start right away and begin constructing something without having to insert these default actors that you would eventually end up inserting them yourself anyway. So this is a great quick way to start your level. And a blank new level will be a completely empty map. If you want to open up the default map template, go to Content folder inside the Content browser, then to First Person Blueprint, Maps, and double click on the first person example map. So to open any level, you can either use the Content browser or go to File, Open Level, and navigate into the folder to open that map. And then double clicking on the map file. To save any map, let me go ahead and go to File, New Level, open up a default, go to File, Save As, and just save new map into a folder that I want to save this file into. Or we can create a whole new folder by choosing Content folder. Let's go to right click into the empty space and choose a new folder. You can name this folder anything you want. I'm gonna name it My Maps. Then down here on the bottom, define a name for your map and click Save. And here's our custom folder with our map. Now, just like any other game engine or software, you have a perspective viewport and you have orthographic viewports. In order to see the 2x2 split of viewports, come up here on the top right of the viewport and restore this viewport. And now you have left, front, top, and perspective. And in order to maximize any of these viewports, just click on this maximize icon at the top right of that viewport. There are a couple of shortcuts that you can use. So while you are in perspective viewport, if you press Alt G, this will be perspective, Alt H, front, Alt J, top, and Alt K, left. And then press Alt G to go back into perspective. While you're in the perspective viewport, you'll be able to see all of the actors inside that viewport. These actors will not appear in game. And if you want to see perspective viewport as it would appear in game from the player's point of view, press G for game mode. And if you press G again, this will bring back all of the actors. You can also use this drop down menu and enable or disable game mode. Another useful function is real time or Control R. So if you look at the sky right now, they're not moving. And if I press Control R, this will enable real time mode and you'll be able to see movement inside that viewport. Let's press Control R again. If you press F11, and I often use this shortcut, this will take you into full mode view. So it will maximize the perspective view or whichever viewport you have enabled, and it will fill your screen. Press F11 again, and it will go back to the editor mode. Again, these three functions, real time, game mode, and full view, can be accessed by using the drop down menu. Here's real time, game mode, and full view or immersive mode. And last thing I want to cover about viewports is you have an option using the lit or any other view mode option here. So lit is the default and the most commonly used perspective view mode. This will give you exactly what your level would look like inside the game. But you can experiment and take a look at unlit, wireframe, detail lighting, lighting only, and so on. Most of these will be used when you're more advanced with Unreal Engine. In the beginning, I would stick with wireframe, unlit, and lit. Now let's navigate around the viewport. If you press and hold the right mouse button and then move the mouse around, you'll be able to look around from a stationary position. At the same time, you're holding the right mouse button. And if you press W or S, this will move you forward and move you back. So W moves you forward and the S key moves you back. A and the D will strafe you left and the D key will make you move right. And if you use the WASD together, you can move around the viewport, and with the mouse button you can look around. And again, as I'm moving around, I am keeping the right mouse button pressed. And if I let go, I can't use the WASD keys to fly around. If you press and hold the left mouse button and then move the mouse forward and back, you will move the camera forward and back. And if you turn left and right, you'll just look left and right. If you hold down the middle mouse button and move forward and back, this will move you up and move you down. And if you move left and right, this will strafe you left and right. And if you use the mouse wheel, you'll move the camera forward and back. Most of the time you'll be using the right mouse button, press and hold, and then the WASD keys to move around. That will get you around majority of the time. If you don't like to hold the right mouse button as you move around and press the WASD keys, you can change that by going to Edit, Edit the Preferences, and under Viewport, you can change Flight Camera and Control Type and use the drop down menu and change it. So currently we are using this WASD only when a mouse button is pressed, but you can change it to the other two options. If you want to increase or decrease how fast you're moving around the viewport, use the slider at the top right of the viewport, and you can turn and decrease the camera movement speed. This will be extremely slow. This is great for detail work. And if you have a large world, we can increase this camera speed all the way up to 8. This will move you around extremely fast. Now let's bring it back down to 4. To navigate inside an orthographic viewport, let's go to Top View and let's find our scene. And I'm using the mouse wheel to zoom in and zoom out. If I press and hold the right mouse button, I'm able to pan around that viewport. If I press and hold the left mouse button, this will marquee select and I can drag around multiple objects to select them. And if I middle mouse click and drag, this will give me measuring tool, so I can measure distances. The measuring tool only works in orthographic viewports. Let's jump back to perspective viewport. In Unreal Engine 4, an object is often called an actor, so you'll hear either object or an actor being referred to the same thing. To select any actor inside your perspective viewport, you simply left click to select it. And to deselect, you can hit escape. I'm going to quickly insert a static mesh, so I show you how to work with objects, how to rotate, scale, and move them. And don't worry exactly how I'm doing this, because we'll cover how to insert a static mesh a little later. So by selecting any object or any actor inside the scene, left click to select it, and you will see one of 3 gizmos on that object. Currently this is a move gizmo, and if you press the spacebar key, you will cycle between rotate, scale, and move. And right up here at the top toolbar, you can switch this manually. You can also press W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. But spacebar is usually what I use, and just cycle through them. To move any object, you simply make sure that it's using the move gizmo, and just left click and drag on any of these axes to move that object. You can do this in the perspective viewport, and you can do this in any other orthographic viewports. To rotate, switch to rotate gizmo, and just left click and drag on the axis that you want to rotate. And same for scale. Switch to scale, left click and drag on any of the axes to scale, but it's usually better to scale on X, Y, Z together. So just grab right in the middle, and this will scale uniformly across X, Y, and Z all together. And I'm pressing Ctrl Z to undo. Now this scale, rotate, and move works for static meshes as well as any other actors inside the scene. With the exception of certain actors inside the scene, you won't be able to scale them, but you can rotate them and move them. Left click to select the static mesh, and to delete any actor from the scene, you simply hit delete after selecting that object. When you're working with objects inside the scene, you will have two coordinate systems to move that object along. So let me bring back the static mesh. And currently, this static mesh can be moved along world coordinate system. The other coordinate system is the local coordinate system. And to switch between the two is you go up here at the top toolbar of the viewport and left click to cycle between world and local. World is what you'll be using most of the time, and this refers to the object being moved in world space. And if we choose local, this object can now be rotated and moved in local object space. So let me switch back to world and show you how this works. So let's say you've placed a static mesh and you've rotated and you positioned it. And to move this object, we can move it in world coordinate system by selecting it and just moving it, and this will move that object along XYZ as it applies to the entire world. But if we change this to local, now you can see that the XYZ changed and we can move this object along its local coordinate system. The shortcut key is Ctrl-tilde, and you'll be able to switch between world and local. And again, most of the time you'll be working with world coordinate system, and you'll change this to local on case-by-case basis. Each object you select inside the perspective viewport will have its own details panel or properties panel. So if we select this cube, the static mesh, on the right hand side, right here on the bottom, you will have details panel, and it will change depending on the type of object that you select. This is where you would set different settings for that actor. So if let's say we select this directional light, through here you can change the intensity of this light, change the light color, and a lot of other options for that light. Choose atmospheric fog and you can change what that fog functions like inside the level. Same for static meshes, player starts, or any other actor that you select. You can also have its own window pop up. Go to Windows, Details, and have a new detail panel open as a floating window. Let's go ahead and close this. Now let's cover a very important content browser. And you'll find the content browser panel right here on the bottom. Content browser is the content management system in Unreal Engine. Through here, you'll look for objects such as static meshes, textures, materials, audio, particle effects, and you will insert all of these objects into your scene from the content browser. So just like we looked for this cube, we'll use the content browser to look inside any of these folders that were created, and we can take a look at what kind of static meshes it includes, what other folders and subfolders it has. We can take a look at all of the objects that are available for this project. So you will be using content browser a lot to look and insert objects that you want inside your scene. To make it easier to find all of these assets, you can use the filter drop-down menu, and you can filter by which type of asset that you want to look through. So you can filter by static meshes only, or you can look through by texture only, or you can have multiple filters set. And now you can just take a look at materials and textures altogether. Let's go ahead and clear these. You can either use the filter drop-down menu again to uncheck, or right click on these icons and click on remove. You can also search for a specific name inside individual folder, just like we did for the cube, or you can search entire content folder, which will look in all of the subfolders beneath it. And let's go ahead and clear this. And if you want to have a content browser panel as a floating window, just like for the details panel, go to Windows, Content Browser, and select Content Browser 2, 3, or 4. And you'll have it as a floating window. And you can also take this tab and dock it at the very top. And let's go ahead and close this tab off. Static meshes inside Unreal Engine are 3D models that were created inside a 3D modeling application and then imported into the editor. And static meshes will make up the majority of your environment construction. To insert static meshes into your scene, you'll be using the content browser. So let's go ahead, let me select this cube and I'm going to delete it. And inside the content browser, let's filter by static meshes. Let's also make sure that we select the content folder so we are looking inside every other folder beneath it. And here we can look through all the available static meshes that came with starter content, and to insert one into your level, you simply left click and drag right into your scene, into the perspective viewport. Let's go ahead and rotate the static mesh. Another way to insert is to select a static mesh, and then in the perspective viewport, you right click and choose place actor, which will be the selected static mesh from the content browser. But most of the time I just simply left click and drag right into the scene from the content browser. Let me delete 2 of these. When you select any static mesh inside the perspective viewport, in the details panel, you will have 2 options. You can have the static mesh as a static mesh, which is a static object, or movable, which is a totally dynamic static mesh. Majority of your static meshes will be set to static, and this is the default when you insert these static meshes into a scene. And on case-by-case basis, you'll change these to movable for those static meshes that need to be completely dynamic. And you would just simply left click to change it. So as a beginner starting out, just keep these static, and then when you get more intermediate and advanced, then you can look into setting these as movable. If you double click on any static mesh icon from the content browser, this will open up Static Mesh Editor. And through here you have its own detail panel where you'll be able to change certain settings for this static mesh. You can also take a look at collision, UVs, set up different light map channels, create your own collision for this static mesh if you don't have any, and the settings that you change here will be applied to every instance of this bench throughout the level. Now you can also change some of these settings through the detail panel by selecting that object inside the perspective viewport, and you have this detail panel where you can change some of the similar options as you would in the static mesh editor. But if you change any settings through the detail panel by selecting that object, this will be applied only for this instance of the static mesh. So if I have multiple of these benches, if I change the settings in the detail panel through here, I'm only changing these for this particular bench, and this bench will continue to remain and have settings that are default and are being pulled from the static mesh editor. And any settings that I change here will be applied to every instance of the static mesh that are already in the level. So static mesh editor is more of a universal way to update your settings, and then you can override these settings through the details panel for this object only. Majority of the time when you first import a static mesh, you'll update and change settings through the static mesh editor. And then as you are inserting and working with each individual static mesh in the level, you'll be changing them through the static mesh detail panel. This following step is extremely important, and that is grid snapping. When you create your environments, you have to make sure that everything is aligned and is snapped to the grid. There are 3 options for various grid settings. First is the move grid. This is when the objects snap when you move them, and it can be accessed right here. The second one is rotation grid, and the third one is scale grid. When you see these 3 icons enabled, just like they are right here, that means that all these objects will snap when you move them, rotate them, or scale them. So let's take this bench, and we can't quite see how much we're snapping on the grid because we can use the drop down menu and change the grid spacing to a different value. So currently it's set to 10, so let's change it to 100. And now if we move a bench or any other object, it will snap at 100 unit increments. If we rotate, this will snap at every 10-degree increments, and we can change this using the drop down menu to any value we want. And scale, we have it set at 0.25. Let's change it to 1. I'm gonna go ahead and reset these back to their default values. Most important grid setting you're going to be using is the move grid. So when you change these values, let me go to orthographic viewport so you can see better. Right now, each individual square is 50 units. If we change this to, let's say, 10, you can see that the grid spacing has changed, and now each individual grid unit is 10 units. And now it's set to 500, so it'll be fairly large. When you construct environments in Unreal, it's good to start off with 10 and 50, maybe 100, as you block in the spacing and the layout of the level. And as you get down to begin to detailing, then you can drop this down to 5 and 1. But most of the time, I would recommend you keep this between 5 and 50. The hotkey to change the grid spacing is the bracket keys. The left bracket key will decrease the grid, and the right bracket key will increase the grid. And the only time that you ever will want to turn off the grid spacing and make objects not snap to the grid at all is when you're doing highly detailed work, or you need to position that specific static mesh or object more fluently without having to snap to the grid. But most of the time you definitely want to keep these on. BSP brushes are the most basic building blocks of a level. These are simple geometric shapes that are created inside Unreal Engine Editor. So before you start detailing, lighting, or using static meshes or 3D models, BSP brushes will be your first go-to for blocking in and prototyping a level. You'll be using BSP brushes at the very beginning of environment creation, and you will focus on the layout, prototyping gameplay, and making sure that scale and proportion is correct. So the main key with BSP brushes is to create a shell of your level and to prototype how the level looks and plays before inserting any static meshes or working on any detailing and lighting. To create BSP brushes, go to the Modes panel and left-click to enable BSP menu. Here you have a set of basic geometric shapes that you can drag right into the perspective viewport. So let's left-click, drag a box right in here, and the BSP brush will be created. In here, if you left-click on a BSP brush, it will be selected, and you can move, and it will auto-update and rebuild geometry for you. When you select a BSP brush, in the Details panel, you'll be able to change the size by adjusting XYZ values. So currently, this brush is set at 200 units across X, Y, and Z. And we can change this. We can increase it, let's say 300. Along Y, let's make it 100. And along Z, let's bring it up to 400. And let's go ahead and reset these values back to default. We can drag any other shape right into the perspective viewport. So let's say we drag linear staircase, and in the details panel, with that brush, with that shape selected, you can see that the brush settings have changed. So for the cube, we had XYZ, and for the staircase, we have additional for step length, height, and we can adjust these accordingly. So the details panel will be different for each shape of these brushes. Let's go ahead and select the cube again, and when you drag any of these brushes, they will be additive brushes, meaning that they have been added into the level. There's another type of a brush, and that is called subtractive brush. So if we redrag our cube, and let's go ahead and position it so it intersects this first cube. Right now nothing's happening because both of these brushes are additive. But if we select the second brush and in the details panel, we can change this to subtractive. And this brush will subtract from previously added additive brushes. And if we go ahead and left click and drag this down, this will be subtracting from the first additive cube. And we can go ahead and change the shape to something else. So the basic workflow of adding and subtracting brushes is first, you'll be adding BSP brushes into the level, you'll be reshaping them, and then you'll be redragging some of these brushes again, and then changing them to subtractive in order to subtract from your additive brushes. Now, to get really good at BSP geometry blocking, you have to spend a little bit of time and block in a few levels with nothing else but BSP brushes. But these would be your first go-to when you have an idea for a level and you open up the editor. You'll be using BSP brushes to get the overall layout and how the level will look and play before you insert any static meshes or focus on any lighting. Now, to change the shape of a BSP brush, the fastest way is to use geometry editing mode. So instead of selecting a brush and then going through the detail settings trying to find the right values, if you switch over to geometry editing or Shift 5 and then come over to the brush and you can select a face or vertice or an edge and then drag and modify the shape of that brush. You can select vertices by left clicking to select, and press Ctrl and left click to select multiple vertices, and you can drag them out. And with the face, left click to select, and then just drag it out to modify the shape. That is the fastest way to quickly modify any brush that's already inside your level. And majority of the time when I insert BSP brushes, I use geometry editing to change their shape. And then when you're done, just quickly switch back to place mode or shift 1. One of the most commonly asked questions is how much BSP do you use compared to static meshes? Here's a map from Content Examples by Epic, and this particular environment was started off with BSP brushes. Every single shape in here is a BSP brush that was used by dragging using the BSP menu and then resizing each brush like you've just seen. Once you get the proportion, the scale, and the layout down just to how you like it, your next step is to replace every single brush or as much as you can with static meshes. So I'm gonna come over here and fly to the next structure, which is the same layout and shape, but everything has been replaced with static meshes. So this is the same space, but now it does not include any BSP brushes. And if we go to show and turn off visibility for static meshes, all we are left with are the BSP brushes from the first structure. Let's go turn it back on. So once you've blocked in with BSP brushes, you want to eliminate as much as possible and replace those BSP brushes with static meshes. It's not uncommon to go almost 100% with static meshes and absolutely no BSP brushes by the end of your environment construction. But anywhere between 90-10 or 80-20, and in some cases you can go 70-30, where 70, 80, or 90% are static meshes and 30, 20, or 10% are BSP brushes that make up the final creation of your environment. Player scale and proportion is another important element when constructing your environments. Everything you create inside Unreal has to be to correct player scale, and everything has to be proportionate so the world and the environment looks real. If the objects inside the environment are either too small or too big, it will destroy the illusion of your world. Let's take this scene as an example. Right now, it's very difficult to tell how large this ground plane is. You don't have a judge of scale that you can use to see and to build everything to correct proportion. To help with that, you need to know how large or how tall a player character is inside Unreal. And to begin, usually what I do is insert a BSP brush with exact same dimensions as a character inside Unreal. So let's go ahead and I'm going to drag this into the scene. And I'm going to come into the detail panel and change X, Y, and Z. I'm going to set X to 60, Y to 60, and Z, which is the height, to 180. And I just come over here and make sure that this box, this BSP brush, is on the ground. Now this BSP brush resembles a player height, depth, and width. And if we take a look, now it's a little easier to tell that this ground plane is not very large compared to the player reference. Let me show you a couple of other options that you can use instead of a BSP box. I'm going to go to View Options in the Content browser, use the drop-down menu, and enable Show Engine Content. I'm going to select Engine Content folder, and I'm going to filter by Skeletal Meshes. And here I have a skeletal mesh that was provided by Epic, Tutorial TPP. And I just simply left-click and drag right into the level. Now this skeletal mesh is slightly taller than 180. So I'm just simply going to select the skeletal mesh and scale this down along Z to 0.95. And that seems about right. And now I can use the skeletal mesh as a reference for player scale. And another newer option that you can use is if you go to Marketplace, scroll down and choose Character and Animations. And here's Unreal Engine 4 Mannequin, which is free to download and was created by Epic that we can use as a reference to player scale. Left click, and here you can download it by choosing which version you want. I already have it installed and downloaded on the computer. So after you download, go to Library, scroll down inside your Vault section, go to Unreal Engine 4 Mannequin, and Add to Project. Let's go ahead, show all projects. And I'm going to select WOLD tutorials. And I have 4.8 version of Unreal Engine Mannequin, so I'm gonna use the drop down menu, select it and add to this project. Now inside of our project, here is our new folder that's been added, Unreal Engine 4 Mannequin Mobile. I'm also going to turn off these engine content folders. So I'm going to use the drop down menu and disable show engine content. And let's go ahead, select the folder with Unreal Engine 4 Mannequin and left click and drag that mannequin right into the scene. So here we have 3 different options that you can use to judge scale with a player reference. You can either use a box, the yellow dude from the engine content folder, or the downloaded Unreal Engine 4 Mannequin. And they will all be 180 units tall, and they greatly help you to construct your environments to correct scale and proportion. And you should insert one of these into your map every time you construct your environment. Another important actor that you should insert into your level is a player start. A player start defines a location where a character player will spawn from inside your level. You should have at least one of these inside your environment, even if that environment will never have playable characters. It's just good practice to insert and have one of these inside your map. Now we already have one inserted into the default template, so I'm going to head select it and delete. And to insert a player start, you simply go to underneath modes panel to basic, select player start, and left click and drag right into perspective viewport. Now let me show you how to add a directional light, then a spotlight, and a point light. These are the 3 essential light types that you'll be working with. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the directional light from here, from our scene. I'm also going to delete the atmospheric fog and the skybox. So what we have is a completely dark black environment. We still have some lights on these characters, but that's because we haven't rebuilt our lighting. So I'm going to rebuild the lighting really quick. Don't worry exactly what I'm doing right now because there is a step for that a little later before we finish off this video. So I'm going to make sure that this is set to preview and build. Alright, so now let's go ahead and insert a directional light. To insert any lights, you go into the modes under place panel, go to lights, and left click and drag the directional light right into the scene. Your environment will automatically be lit for you. So at this point you would just need to rotate and position the direction of the light that's going to hit your environment. So you can use the rotation tool and just position it to exactly how you would want your light based on the time of day of your environment. Next, we need to adjust 2 properties. I'm going to open up a new details panel, but you can do this in the same details panel here on the bottom right. But for the sake of clarity, so you can see better, I'm going to open up a new details panel, and the 2 settings we're going to change are intensity and light color. There are a lot of other properties that you'll be working with. So intensity is set to 10. This is usually enough, but sometimes I turn this down to about 8, maybe 7.5, a little lower in intensity. And light color, I'm going to left click on this color bar and choose the color. And again, this will depend on the time of day that you have. And click OK. I'm going to close this, and we have inserted and tweaked the 2 properties of a directional light. And a directional light is going to be your sunlight in the scene. This will illuminate your entire world, and it is often used as your primary light and the light that you would use to light your exterior environments. Now let's go ahead and insert a point light. So for this, I'm going to just make sure that this ground plane is a little bit bigger. And I'm going to insert a couple of static meshes right here so we get to see the effect of the point light and the spotlight. So I'm going to pause the video for just a second and have a couple of static meshes to cause a shadow area. So here I have 2 static meshes that are causing a shadow so we can work with a point light. To insert a point light, again, you go to the modes place panel. Under lights, you have a point light. This is a all directional light that is often used for interior environments or exterior areas that need such a light. So after you left click and drag this point light into your scene, you need to tweak properties. So go ahead and select the point light, and under the details panel, you can change intensity. We're going to turn this down to 2500, and you want to change attenuation radius, which is the influence of this light. So you can do this manually through the details panel by changing this value, or you can change this by using the spacebar key until you get the scale tool and scaling this down. This will turn the radius of the light all the way down. And let's go ahead and change the light color. Let's set this to blue. And now let's insert one last light that you'll be using a lot, is a spotlight. So I'm going to left click and drag spotlight from the same menu as for the other lights. This is a great light to use from a specific source, such as a lamp up above in the ceiling, maybe a searchlight or a street light. You can see the influence radius of this light, and for this light, again, select it. In the details panel, you will be changing intensity. We're going to leave this at default. Light color, let's go ahead and select it to maybe something like red. Inner cone angle, this is the inner angle of the light. Outer cone, what I'm doing is I'm left clicking, holding and dragging right over here on these little icons. This allows me to change the angle. So the outer angle is the outer radius of influence. And let's go ahead also change the inner cone angle to have softer fall off between the outer radius and the inner radius. And then we have attenuation radius. If we take a look at the slide, the influence of this light is a little bit too much. So we're going to bring this in right until it hits the ground floor. And these are the main lights that you'll be working with when you construct your environments. So you have your directional light, which is your main primary light source, your sunlight, then you have a spotlight, and you have a point light. World Outliner will list every single object that is inside your scene, and you will find the World Outliner right here at the top right of the editor. If you don't see the World Outliner, you can go to Windows and make sure that this is checked. You can select any object that's already in the scene by double clicking and centering your view in the perspective viewport. You can turn on and off visibility of certain actors. And when your scene gets way too big, you can search for specific actors by typing in inside the search box. Let's go ahead and clear this. You can also left click to select it, and then left click again, and then rename any of these actors' names so you can find them better. Another powerful feature of having the World Outliner is to organize your content. So you can come up here and create a new folder, name it, and then you can place items inside that folder. So if you have multiple sections of an environment and you want to hide those sections from view so you can focus and work on one section at a time, you would create folders and then place those actors inside that folder. And then you can left click and drag and then just hide that folder from view. So World Outliner is very powerful for organizing your content, finding actors inside the scene, and to see all of the actors that make up your map. You can playtest your map right inside the editor. And the easiest and the most commonly used function that you will use is to right click inside the perspective viewport and choose play from here. Actually, we can't quite see it, so you right click and then choose play from here. This will spawn you inside the map from that location where you right clicked, and depending on the type of game template you chose, you will spawn as a character. So in that case, this was first person shooter template. Another way is to come up to the top toolbar and click on play. This will spawn you inside the map from the player start position. And hit escape to go back to the editor mode. You have a few other options. Using the drop down menu, you can choose which modes that you want to spawn yourself into. But to get things started at the very beginning, use right click, play from here, and the play icon at the top toolbar. The last option that you will use a lot is the build function. So I'm going to open up our lighting example. So as you construct your environment and you're working with lights, geometry, the viewport is showing you best approximation of what your environment will look like. In order to see most accurate lighting representation, you have to build your level. If you come up here at the top toolbar, use the drop down menu, and you have a set of options. You can choose build lighting only, you can choose to build geometry, build paths, and build level of detail. Or you can build all by clicking on the build icon at the top toolbar. By building, this will render and calculate your lighting, your geometry, your paths, and will show you what your map will look like as close to what the player will see in game. One more option that you want to take a look at is lighting quality. You have 4 different lighting qualities from preview all the way to production. Production will be used when you are finalizing your environment and you need to build everything at the highest quality possible. This will take the longest to build, but in the beginning you will use preview a lot. This will be the fastest and it will still produce closest results to what your environment will look like. So we're going to choose preview so it's faster build. And these lights that we've inserted, including the directional light and spotlight with the point light, these lights are not the final representation of what they will look like in game. And if we go ahead, right click and play from here, you will see that we have red text telling us that we need to rebuild our lights. So let's go ahead and actually rebuild all, and you will see the updated lighting after it has been rebuilt. Now this is a very small scene, so it took very fast. And this is the lighting. So we would need to make sure that we tweak a few more properties, and when we're ready, we would rebuild everything on production to get the highest quality possible for our environment. And the final 2 options that I'm going to cover are Learn and Marketplace section. Here you can purchase and download additional content to use inside your projects. And inside the Learn section, you'll find a lot of examples, templates, and samples that you can learn from. So if you scroll down, there's a lot of things that you can learn by downloading these examples and taking a look at how these environments were created. So I hope you learned a lot from this crash course, and it gave you a broad overview of how to quickly get started and what it takes to use Unreal Engine 4. And please take a look at Unreal Engine 4 Fundamentals. This is a premium tutorial series. It will show you how to use Unreal Engine 4 from the very beginning.